new hardware pack includes longer bolts, quarter-inch spacers that go with them in order, because the gearbox is now slightly further away from the engine, and one spacer that goes with the bigger bolt that screws into the engine. So you got a 12mm bolt, you have a shorter 3/8 bolt with 2 washers and a spacer and a nut, and then you have 2 longer ones that go through the starter, also with spacers, washers, and nuts. The back of the gearbox looks like this. This already has a coupling installed onto it. Here's something that I will explain in a chapter by itself. Okay, in order to update the flywheel on the 110 engine, there's one consideration that needs to be made. If your gearbox does not already have this, and if it does have a setup like this, a spider we call it, like this, with these pins in it, you need to look behind it with a, you can put a little mirror or something and make sure that they're welded. Some were just pressed in and they've been fine, but we want to see them all welded from the back side from now forward. So make sure it's welded. If it's welded and you have this setup, then you're good to go. If you don't have this setup, you have a piece like this that has just holes here with bolts and nuts that went through, then you don't have the correct setup for the new system. What you then have to do is take your gearbox and send it, it's very small and light, throw it in a cardboard box with some bubble wrap and send it to Viking, and we will install this piece on your gearbox. The reason that we'd like to do it here is because this spline is very tight, and we cannot just press it onto the gearbox without taking the front cover of the gearbox off, because if we were to put that kind of pressure on here, we have a chance of damaging the bearings inside the gearbox, which obviously we don't want to do. So now there's 2 choices there as far as for the customer. You can choose to purchase this piece and not a new gear, and we can manage to press this in place. It will push a little bit of metal out because it's a very tight fit, because the parts were not made at the same time. Or the ultimate solution is to replace the bottom gear with this piece that was a matched set, and then we can install this piece and the new gear, and everything will have the 100% correct fit. Now, without buying a small gear, like I said, it is possible to do. We've done several that way, but we will push a little bit of metal out of the spline when we press it together. So what we're doing is we're moving the gearbox in. We want the center to hit the center, and we want these 3 dowels to hit where they're going to go. Of course, you can just kind of rotate the gearbox to make that happen, get things out of the way, and then just wiggle it, and it'll go right in place. Once you get to this point, you can see that because of the new parts, we needed more room, and we will now have a 1/4-inch gap at each of these locations. What I'm going to do is do the one here that uses a bolt that screws into the engine. That's the only one that screws into the engine. The other ones use, that's a little tight, so we're going to have to open that up a little bit. But that goes here, and that gets you started, and then that'll hold it in place for the rest of the hardware. So we'll jump ahead and show the hardware installed. Okay, you do have to add 3 washers here we saw on this bolt that threads into the engine. That's just so that you don't bottom out the threads here. The bolt is just long enough to take advantage of the full amount of threads with those 3 washers. If you were to go with a shorter bolt, we just wouldn't get full engagement with the threads. Now, everything is now set up to the point where it's been tightened down, but the whole gearbox is still kind of loose on the engine. So that means that it's now up flush. All the bolts are just half a turn or a turn loose. And we're now going to snug all the bolts, and then we're going to torque these to 450 inch-pounds. That goes for all the bolts, and that concludes that part of the installation. And then just hook up your hoses that you used to have. This engine happens to have oiling to the gearbox. Yours might or might not have that. It has a return hose to the oil can and so forth.